practicable on the board's website. At this afternoon's meeting, we are providing Communication Access Real-Time Translation, also known as CART. Anyone who would like to access this service should send an email to the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided. Visit rtd-denver.com, and a live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. Directors and members of staff, for the sake of the record, if you would like to be acknowledged during today's proceedings, I would ask you to please raise your virtual hand and wait for me to call you before proceeding to speak. Directors and staff participating by phone can also raise their virtual hands to indicate that they would like to speak by pressing *9. To toggle your mute setting on the phone, press *6. I would now like to call the roll for the committee members. Director Catwin.
Here.
Director Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Brendel.
Here.
And Mr. Ullenberger.
Here.
And I am here. For the record, I see that we also have Director Guzman with us. Thank you for joining us. Just quickly make sure. Great. I would like to open public comment to anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. During this time, the committee will not offer any direct comments or responses. However, if you would like to be contacted regarding your public comment, please email the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Mr. Kroll, I don't see any virtual hands raised. Do you have any on your end?
I do not, Chair Deschel, and we did not receive any public comment via email in advance of this meeting.
Great, thank you. With no participants in the queue, we will close public comment period at this time. Before we move into our one discussion item for our meeting today, I want to remind everyone that our time is limited to 90 minutes total, and that we are meeting today to wrap up our internal audit update from November. In addition to our internal audit update, we have an executive session that we will adjourn into that we need 30 to 45 minutes to effectively complete. As such, I'm going to do my best to move our discussion along and ask that we all remain conscientious of our time constraints. For the sake of the record, I note that Chair Geisinger has joined us. For our internal audit update, I'd like to ask Doug McLeod, Chief Financial Officer, to present this item.
Thank you, Chair DeSalle, and good afternoon. This is Doug McLeod, Chief Financial Officer, and I would like to introduce Matt Marino from Reuben Brown, as well as Dave Moronic, who will continue the presentation. So, Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Doug. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to have a second try at finishing the communications with regard to the internal audit. I will touch on a couple items from the agenda. We didn't update the overall update as far as like where we're at in the different audits we have conducted. We continue to be on track with issuing both the revenue and non-revenue vehicle internal audits for Q1 of 2024. And then our plan as far as the audit plan has not been modified. So the plan we talked about during the November meeting of this committee has not really updated. We do continually evaluate all this and make sure that we're providing the highest value to the RTD as far as relevant information. So I do want to remind everybody that we do have the ability to update the audit plan if we see fit, but we are going to continue proceeding with that. When I look at the agenda, we did discuss all but one of the ITGC, our IT general controls recommendations, except for the few that were redacted. So we did not get to recommendation 11, which was one that was not one of the redacted ones. So I was going to go through that if everybody wants to, or do we want to proceed with going, we'll go with that. I see several nodding heads. So view. I'm hoping you're seeing full screen. Okay, so this is the last of the recommendations with regard to the ITGC over Oracle. This one has to do with SOC 1 Type 2 reports. So if you're, I know I'm using acronyms, but basically that is a report that's provided by service providers that the controls that are used within a service provider are operating effectively. So the observation that came out of this audit is that we were made aware that there were SOC 1 Type 2 reports. However, we did not evidence review by RTD of those SOC 1 Type 2 reports. And so the recommendation is that obviously if we're obtaining those, it's important to review those and make sure that we note any deficiencies that might be noted in those reports, and that we're also providing or implementing the different controls we need to on our side to be using those services of the different service providers. A corrective action plan was provided by cybersecurity staff, and they're going to work on making sure that they obtain those on an annual basis and that they are also reviewed. And so that planned target date is March 31st of 2024, which is just a little bit over 90 days away from today. So any questions with regard to observation 11? Okay, so that is the last of the recommendations that we're going to discuss in normal non-executive session. As a reminder, several of the recommendations under the IT general controls audit were deemed to be very sensitive in nature, and so we would entertain the motion to go to executive session to discuss those if we have no further comments on the other items.
Great. Mr. Kroll, I see you have your hand up, and I think it's that we have other matters first and then executive session. Director Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is not with regard to the IT, but rather the audit reports that we saw in October. And I'm just wondering from staff, I know that there were a couple of things that were scheduled for completion on December 31st of this year, and I'm just wondering if those are on track. And if they are, if we will be getting any kind of a summary update of where we are in those action items. And I'm referencing particularly the contract, I think, contracting and procurement report that was supposed to be done.
Great. I see Ms. Johnson has her hand raised. Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Director Catlin, for the question. Yes, staff is working on those items, and we will be ensuring that we provide updates. If I recall, we talked about the manner in which we could be doing those going forward, and so we will confer with you all on the best vehicle in which to provide that information, recognizing the audit schedule. Perhaps it's written communique that precedes an audit committee.
If I might, Mr. Chair, I know that there are non-audit committee members on the board who are interested in particular at a more granular level of the contracting and procurement process. And I know that it was recommended that there be a tracking mechanism put in place, and that was scheduled to be put in place on the by the 31st. So I think that there perhaps would be other board members that would be interested in seeing what that looked like. That's all.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please.
just with any of the board materials, they always go to all board members and not just committee members. So I should have qualified that in my response because it wouldn't just be disseminated solely to this committee. But recognizing if there was a broader interest, then we would work in tandem to ensure we were meeting the needs of the board.
Thank you. I just know that that particular tracking mechanism has been asked about in the past. And so I was just wondering if that was on track. Thank you.
Great. Are there any other comments or questions from the committee or other board members in attendance with respect to audit observation 11 on the ITGC audit? Seeing no further comments or questions from the committee and our attendees, I'll now move to other matters. I have one item I'd like to discuss under other matters. At our November board meeting, many directors indicated an interest in seeing an improvement to how RTD budgets for and executes on capital projects. I'd like to get the committee's thoughts on asking for some ad hoc audit hours to be spent on looking into the capital project budgeting and execution process at RTD. I've previously discussed this matter with our Chief Financial Officer, Doug McLeod, and our Chief Audit Executive, Matt Marino, and now would like to hear from you all as to whether you all think this is a valuable exercise. The end goal here would be to help RTD improve in this area on a look forward basis. And if there's any directors who would like to weigh on this, just want to get some consensus on whether we should move forward here or how. Yeah, Mr. Ellenberger.
I would just say that I think it's a worthwhile endeavor, especially given the capital intensive nature of the RTD and some of the assets that are purchased to go through this. I would probably ask how many hours we're planning on using out of the ad hoc budget. But other than that, I think it sounds like a good audit to do. And I guess if we're calling it ad hoc, would this be more or less a full internal audit, or are we thinking about specific procedures and limited scope?
Good question. What would your thoughts be? I think just to add some background, see Mr. McLeod and Ms. Johnson both have their hands raised. I think staff time is something where we've certainly heard, they need time to implement the audits that we just got back. So I think I would lean probably towards limited scope based on that conversation. And also recognizing that components of the capital program are going to come to light through our district revenue and non-revenue vehicle audits, I believe. Mr. Marino can keep me honest there. And so I'll go to Ms. Johnson, and maybe it sounds like it might be helpful to hear from Mr. Marino sort of what components we are already going to cover in the current audit plan, and maybe that'll help provide some fodder for conversation. Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much, Director Deschelle, and I greatly appreciate the context around in which you presented this item. I recognize that you did have an opportunity to meet with CFO McLeod and Mr. Marino. If you could extend the professional courtesy to me as the CEO to have a broader understanding of what the path is, recognizing the allocation of staff time, I would appreciate that accommodation, because I have yet to have the opportunity to engage with you all specifically on what it is you're seeking. So if that could be taken into consideration prior to making any determination to the path forward, that would be most appreciative. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Are there any other thoughts? Yeah, Director Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's interesting, certainly in concept. I just wanted one clarifying question and a more general question. So the clarifying question, would you be, is this, I know you're saying looking at a go forward basis, but would the idea be to look at what procedures have been in place, audit our process, and then use an audit to make recommendations for, I guess, I think maybe it's along the lines of Mr. Ellenberger's question of, it'd be limited in scope, and what are there specific policies that we would be looking at here? And I think maybe that leads into my more general question, which was, if you wouldn't mind just providing some context regarding some of the discussion that you did have with Mr. Marino and Mr. McLeod on this. Maybe the two can kind of go together. Just a little bit more context might be helpful. I think this sounds good. I just want to make sure I'm clear on what the mission would be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, coming out of the November board meeting and prior, there was a lot of concern from directors on the way in which the processes we go through for, I think, A, budgeting, but B, specifically with relation to budgeting, capital programs and capital expenditures, and specifically that carry forward budget, and when, where, and how we decide to move a project forward or move a project back, and what systems and processes we use or don't use in order to do that. I also want to name that I believe there are staff has processes and process improvement in place specifically with respect to this, given the sort of recognized need for it to exist. And so there's sort of a lot of moving pieces, and I think this falls sort of into the bucket of, does it make sense to move forward with a limited scope audit now on what processes do we have and are we following them? Or does it make more sense, I think, to wait? And Mr. McLeod can speak more eloquently to what exactly staff is planning, should he want to, or should we wait until that's done and then audit against that? Ms. Marino, Mr. McLeod, is that sort of a fair recap of our conversation? Yeah, Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Chair Giselle. Yes, that is a fair recap of our conversation. And if I might propose that Mr. Marino and Mr. Honick and myself get together and look at some procedures that they might be, based on the feedback that we received from the board at the November 28th meeting and prior. And based on where we would like to get with our presentation of budget numbers, and come back to this committee with a proposed scope of work as well as a number of hours, if that would be okay.
I see Director Rusha has joined us as well. For the sake of the record, I think on my end that would be good as well. I do want to make sure that prior to saying yes, that sounds good, that we honor GM CEO Johnson's request as well, that we're all looped in and we're all deciding whether this makes sense together. So provided she's there too, or she has your designation, that makes sense to me. How do others on the committee feel about that sort of proposed path forward? Yeah, Mr. Ollenberger.
Well, I guess I'll just kind of amend my last comment that I thought it was a good idea. I still think it's a good idea, but if management is in the process of revising this right now, I would recommend holding off. I don't see a point in auditing what's been done in the past unless we think there's misappropriation or fraud or some good reason to audit what's been done in the past. I think we should let them revise the process and then maybe come in after that process has had a few months of or 6 months or whatever of movement, so we can have something to audit after that. The only caveat that I would say to that is sometimes internal audit will come help develop the process or look at the old process and make recommendations to help implement the new process. So that's something that people can consider as well.
Yeah, Director Catlin.
Thank you. I would, I don't want to say approve, but I would be in favor of Mr. Hronik and Mr. Marino and Mr. McLeod working with Deborah to develop a scope of work if they think it's necessary at this time, and it could be very limited. And then proceed with the changes that staff is considering right now. Thank you.
Yeah. Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much, Director Deschel, and I appreciate all the comments that have been provided due to the fact that we as management and leadership team just had a meeting relative to our capital project development process just last Friday, and there's a myriad of things that we have underway that really are going to commence in a robust fashion in January. So to Mr. Ollenberger's point, yes, there's a point where there would be great benefit going forward. And that's why I made the comment in which I did, because I wasn't certain that this committee was aware of what has been taking place. So just wanted to ensure that my comment was taken in the with the intent in which I was providing it. So thank you very kindly, and I think it landed in the manner in which I intended.
Great. Director Davidson.
Thank you for all the comments. Appreciate it. I think to Mr. Ollenberger's point, look back would help if we have these changes taking place. I think what might help the committee, certainly what would help me, would be to get an idea of, just as Ms. Johnson, you were alluding to, where we are in the process, where it starts to serve the agency that an audit might plug in, what we need to be auditing. I think this may drift into the scope of work of the Finance and Planning Committee, but it might be helpful if it would serve this committee to have a just high-level understanding, not now, but perhaps at a future meeting, of where we are in that process. And if Mr. Horanek and Mr. McLeod are going to meet on this topic, perhaps they could share not only their thoughts on this topic and the timing of when an audit might be useful, but also just, Ms. Johnson, where we are in that process of making changes and what some of those changes are. I think that would certainly help me understand a little bit more about where when this might be appropriate.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Snyder.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just had a process question and wondered maybe if the Reuben Brown team might be able to speak to, as we think about when this committee and then ultimately the board decides to take on an ad hoc audit, understanding that the audit plan is developed through the a risk-based process, right? We have that methodology in place. We do a risk assessment. Is there anything that this committee should be thinking about as they're determining how to frame how ad hoc audits will be identified going forward?
Yeah, Mr. Marino. That might not be why you raised your hand, but
I'll try and take both at once. I will say that the revenue and non-revenue audits will hit on some of the elements of how information is gathered and how it is utilized within the organization. So that when the statement was made earlier that the already occurring audits might provide some context on some areas, they will hit on some of that as far as what sort of data is collected on maintenance, when is something due for replacement, all that sort of stuff, which would ultimately feed into your capital budgeting. So that is that part of it. And then we should probably default back to our risk-based approach. And I do appreciate the feedback of if there's some concern around the overall process, maybe understanding, number one, obviously it's large in magnitude, but also there's the likelihood of something could occur or not occur. And so we probably should go back and look at our do the risk-based approach to decide if it's worthy using audit hours, if that makes sense.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Marino. Apologies. I think I might have accidentally called you Mr. Horanek. Mr. Horanek.
I would just add that one of the intentions of providing the ad hoc hour bucket, if you will, is to respond to risk that comes up quickly. So if this was deemed as something that the organization, felt that could add value and help get ahead of certain risks that were identified or are suspected of, I guess I should say. So we could use that bucket pretty freely or pretty quickly then.
Great. Mr. Marino, I see your hand is, no, it's gone. Okay. I think hearing all of this, it sounds like on the next steps category, there's work that's being done, great work that's being done. Updates will go to the Finance and Planning Committee. I believe our next meeting is in February. So to the extent that those updates would implicate audit, I think it would be helpful just to get a brief update at the February Audit Committee meeting. In the interim, I'll leave it to our Chief Audit Executive, our Chief Financial Officer, our CEO, and their respective teams to meet sort of in the interim and decide, is a scope of work and additional audit hours helpful to refining this process? Is it not? I think the one ask I would make is that in either event, right, if it's, hey, we don't think a scope of work is necessary, that you do come back and sort of say, here's why we aren't recommending an additional scope of work. That way we at least can tie a neat bow on the process. Not that this is a vote or a formal action, but can I just get a head nods one way or the other if that sounds good to folks? Great. Are there any other matters to discuss? Okay. At this time, the next audit committee meeting is scheduled for Thursday, February 15th, 2024. At the February 15th meeting, among other items, we expect to hear an update from our external auditors, Plant Moran. In a moment, the committee will meet in executive session to discuss specialized details of a security arrangement. I would like to append the motion to move into executive session to state that the committee meeting will be deemed adjourned after it adjourns into the executive session. For public transparency, this means that once the committee moves into executive session, the main meeting will be adjourned. I will now entertain a motion to move into executive session to discuss the following. Pursuant to section 246402 or D CRS, specialized details of security arrangements, and section 2472-2042A 8A CRS, specialized details of physical and cyber assets of critical infrastructure, protective measures, emergency response, plans or system operational data of such assets that would be useful to a person in planning an attack on critical infrastructure, for presentation of information technology general controls audit, observations, and corrective action plans.
So moved.
I have Director Catlin as the move-in. Is there a second?
Second, Davidson.
I hear Director Davidson as the second. Are there any no votes on this action? With 5 in favor and 0 opposed, the motion carries. For all those who are expected to attend, would you please move into the other room at this time?